India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will arrive in Moscow later today to attend the 22nd India-Russia Annual Summit. He is scheduled to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday. This is also Prime Minister Modi's first visit to Moscow since its invasion of Kiev, an issue on which New Delhi has maintained a neutral stance. It also comes at a time of growing Russia-China closeness. The two-day visit is aimed at assessing bilateral ties between the two countries, including key areas like defense, investment, energy cooperation, education and culture. As per the Kremlin, the leaders will partake in both restricted talks as well as the ones involving delegations of New Delhi and Moscow. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said that trade ties will be at the top of the agenda. This comes as India's import of discounted Russian crude has increased significantly since the war in Ukraine began, that is. Meanwhile, Jaishankar also pointed out towards, and I'm quoting here, trade imbalance between the two countries. While Moscow's total exports to India are $65 billion, India's exports are only about $4 billion. India's Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra has revealed that New Delhi is looking to expand exports across various sectors, including farm products, technology, pharmaceuticals and services. As per India's Foreign Ministry, Prime Minister Modi will reach Moscow later today in the afternoon, following which the Russian President Vladimir Putin will hold a private dinner for the Indian leader, where they are expected to discuss regional and global issues of mutual interest. On Tuesday, Prime Minister Modi will have an in-person interaction with the Indian diaspora in Russia. Later in the day, he will also lay wreath at the tomb of unknown soldier, a war memorial for unidentified Soviet soldiers from World War I. Well, he will then visit Russia's state-owned nuclear energy facility, Rosatom, followed by a restricted meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Although India and Russia have held annual summits since 2000, none have been held since Russian President Vladimir Putin visited New Delhi in 2021. Prime Minister Modi will also talk about the Indians who were, and I'm quoting here, misled into joining the Russian army in its war against Ukraine. The Prime Minister is expected to demand an earliest discharge of these people from the Russian military. Till now, at least 4 Indians have been killed amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. At least 10 Indians have been rescued, while over 20 others have contacted the Indian mission in Moscow to seek their release. Earlier in May, Indian police arrested 4 Russian nationals involved in enticing Indians into Russia over lucrative job offers. Meanwhile, Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov has said that the West is, quote, and I'm quoting here, closely and jealously watching the visit. Adding, the press secretary said that Russia-India ties are at the level of strategic partnership. And for more on this, our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, is joining us live from Moscow. Hi, Siddhant. Prime Minister Modi will be reaching Moscow later today to mark the 22nd India-Russia Annual Summit. Well, a host of issues on the agenda. The Kremlin says the visit will be extensive. How are the preparations looking like? And take us through the Prime Minister's schedule in Moscow as both the countries seek to forge deeper ties.
Well, it's a hugely significant visit of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Russia. The fact that he has chosen Russia for his first bilateral visit in his third term is a message in itself. There are many firsts in this visit, including, of course, as you mentioned, the first visit since the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and also the first visit after a gap of 5 years. Last time the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Russia was in 2019 for a visit visit to Vladivostok. He that time was the first and remains the first and the only Indian Prime Minister to travel to Russia's far east. Now, essentially, it's a two-day packed agenda, starting, of course, with a private dinner later today with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And we will see the pictures, of course, being released. But essentially, it's a summit that is the key focus that takes place on Tuesday, where, of course, everything will be on the table, whether it's regional issues, global issues, the conflict in Ukraine, and of course, the biggest worry for New Delhi right now, the Indians in Russian army, something that India has raised strongly several times, including just last week when the Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met with his counterpart, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. But also, it's a hugely significant visit for Russia, where, of course, we know that West is trying to isolate Russia, and at that time Moscow sees New Delhi as a key partner and a key ally as well, which has been importing Russian crude oil despite Western pressure and, of course, Western comments. But all in all, during this packed 2 days, we will see the Indian Prime Minister addressing the diaspora. He's also visiting a pavilion as well, and of course laying the wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Kremlin.
Right, so now just coming to that the visit comes at a time when the West has isolated Russia. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia comes also just days before the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., where the heads of state will mull more support for Ukraine. What kind of message is the meet between Prime Minister Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin will be sending out?
Quite a contrasting message we will see in Moscow and Washington. Coincidentally, as it might be seen, though it's not quite correct to say given the geopolitics is planned long ago. In Washington, we will see this week the NATO summit, and here in Moscow, we see the leader of the world's largest democracy meeting President Putin. And of course, President Putin is keen to showcase his engagement in the larger Asian region. Remember that recently the World Bank said that there has been high economic progress in Russia. And the credit goes to Asian countries like China and India, who have been increasing their import of Russian crude oil. There has been increased dependence of the Russians towards Asia, not just China, but also India as well. We know that when it comes to China, many see it as over dependence. But all in all, Russia would also like to engage with more countries rather than putting all its eggs in one basket. So that is why India is seen as a key ally, key partner, and that is why this visit is significant. We do expect certain announcements to be made, including, of course, opening of new Indian consulates here in Russia. Currently, there is the Indian embassy here in Moscow. There are two consulates, one in St. Petersburg, one in Vladivostok, and we do expect announcements on two more Indian consulates here in Russia.
Right, thank you, Siddhant, for joining us on the show. We'll, of course, be tracking Prime Minister Modi's historic visit to Russia with you very closely.